State Senator Patricia Van Pelt from the west side of Chicago, who held a public hearing on this crisis, one big piece of it this week, and Reginice McBride, whose son, you see the photo there, her 36-year-old son, Ronald Terrell James, was murdered 13 months ago by the United Center. And Miss McBride, the DNA evidence from that killing has still not been analyzed by the Illinois State Police Crime Lab.
No, it has not.
Now, you were at the hearing the other day and heard the excuses that were offered, the reasons that were offered. What did you think of it?
I just thought it was a lot of way of they was passing the buck, and that it was about money. It was about people just not getting the job done. You know, I don't think anyone really cared.
Now, here's one of the shocking things you shared with me before we began recording here. You've spoken to an eyewitness to your son's killing.
Yes, I have.
There is video evidence.
Yes, it is.
So how does it make you feel that there hasn't been an arrest? Nobody's been charged. You understand there were 3 young men who killed your son, but they're still, these alleged killers are still walking the streets.
I feel that my son is, in their mind, he's a number, which he's not. His name is Ronald Terrell James. He's my son. I feel that no one cares.
Senator Van Pelt, what do you think should be done about it? You focused on the fact that these DNA tests now have a logjam. We got some cases 3 years old where they're not being done. The folks over at the State Police Crime Lab finally came clean with some of the numbers and just how bad this backlog is.
Right, actually the backlog is over 13,000. They have over 13,000 cases.
But that's not all DNA.
Not all DNA.
766 unanalyzed DNA
for murders,
pieces of evidence.
but there's other information that they have, evidence they have regarding murders too. It just may not be DNA. So even though we talk about it's like 752 murders that the DNA hasn't been analyzed, it's even more when you count all the other evidence that's available that haven't been analyzed. This maybe not even be a part of the DNA batch.
So when you got those numbers and you saw that, how did it make you feel?
Well, I felt that I, as a state senator, I had a responsibility to do something about it. I believe that I took it on as my own responsibility to make sure that whatever it is that they have, whatever problem they're having in getting these cases resolved, I need to bring something to the table.
We've had Representative David McSweeney here and Senator Tom Cullerton, both of whom are preparing next month to introduce legislation in Springfield to try to attack this. Right. You're going to be part of that now.
Yes, and also with other legislation, because in L.A. and New York, they are solving their cases really quickly. They don't have the same problems that we're having.
All right, now kudos to you, Gene Roy. You were blowing the whistle on this and banging the drum on this last summer when you came on this show to tell us about it. Looks like we're finally on the verge of making some progress. When you see a case like this young man here who was murdered 13 months ago and the DNA evidence still not analyzed, what goes through your head?
First of all, it's a tragedy. Secondly, this points out there's a failure in government. There's not a failure of any one specific person or any specific individuals. But the nature of criminal investigations, the nature of criminal prosecutions has changed over the past 20 or 30 years. Back in the 70s and 80s, the gold standard was eyewitness identification and a confession along with physical evidence. In the late 80s, the early 90s, we saw what we call the CSI effect, where those shows were very popular. Everybody came to believe in CSI DNA evidence and things of that sort. But somebody was asleep at the switch, and the technology was there too. Somebody was asleep at the switch.
Now, you've been a big enthusiast for rapid DNA.
Yes.
This is the stuff that's used out in the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan to turn around DNA and see whether some terrorist leader's been killed. It could be done here.
Could be done here. As an example,
in a day or two or a few hours?
In a few hours to a day. For an example, that technology was used in the aftermath of the terrible fires in California, and that technology positively identified 41 sets.
Why are we using it here in Chicago?
There's a lot of different reasons, and it goes back to, again, a failure of government. Nobody saw that the way we do business was going towards a forensic-based rather than an eyewitness and confession-based.
So we don't have enough people.
We don't have enough people. There wasn't enough money. Nobody invested in the new technology. Nobody looked at the new technology. And it's only now that there's a crisis that people are looking at it.
Senator, what do you want to do?
Well, I want to be sure that they get those cases resolved. I refuse to live in a city or a state where there could be 752 murderers walking around feeling real happy because they think they've gotten away with murder. We have to change that.
Ms. McBride, as it used to be that having an eyewitness, the retired detective says having an eyewitness, having evidence, having videotape was the gold standard, and yet you feel like Chicago detectives have not followed up sufficiently.
Right. I feel that no one is following up on what they're supposed to be doing as far as any case. It's 766 murders out there that we need to, not only Ronald Terrell James, but all the other families need to have the cases looked
Now I know, Gene, you'd like to talk and follow up on this later on, follow up on this case, and then we will let the public know what you guys come up with. But how overwhelmed is the typical Chicago detective, and how much difference will it make that the other day the mayor and Superintendent Eddie Johnson announced 50 more sergeants are going to be promoted to oversee these kinds of investigations?
That's a good thing. We need more supervision. We need more detectives. We've talked on this show about how New York and LA, with fewer murders than us, have a 15% percent of their complement is assigned as investigators, as opposed to Chicago being under 10%. That needs to be fixed. The city has taken steps to adjust that. They promoted several classes of detectives. Now they're bringing on more supervisors, which is a good thing. Now, if we can get past this other hurdle, which is the evidence, how we process evidence, and DNA, use the rapid DNA system or whatever system, combination of the two existing systems. You know, New York and LA, New York has adopted the system. They're getting dramatic turnarounds. And even before the advent of rapid DNA, New York had vendors that were getting DNA processed within 6 to 8 weeks.
Why are there cases? Because you and I on this show have talked to the mothers of murder victims like Ms. McBride, who have gone out to be their own detectives. They feel the police department hasn't completed the job, and they go out and line up witnesses, and they get evidence. Why has that happened? What is the average detective in Chicago just overwhelmed with the workload and the caseload?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we've talked about this before. You've got a detective that's working 5 days a week. They go to work. They know what time they're going to start. They don't know what time they're going to get home, what time they're going to get finished. They may work 12, 18, 24 hours straight, have to come back after 3 or 4 hours of sleep. If they're not at work, they're in court testifying. We've got detectives that are working 70, 80 hours a week on the light side, and it doesn't leave them any time for, you know, the necessities of life. You know, and they're just overwhelmed by it. One of the things that I tried to do is I saw cases that were close to being solved, and I talked to my commanders, I talked to my lieutenants, I said, bring these guys back, have them come in on Saturday, finish this case off. They're not going to get any other jobs or be diverted anywhere else. And they told me they can't. They literally can't. They haven't been home for 10 days. Wow. You know, the workload is just crushing. We've got to...
Yes, I just think this is just horrendous. I mean, this makes no sense at all. Like the detective said, somebody's been asleep at the wheel, and I have to say that the state government has played a large part in that.
Yes.
In what respect?
Well, our budget. We had budget problems. We lost vendors. That's what I heard during the public hearing, was that we lost vendors because we couldn't pay them. So then
during the budget crisis.
Right, during the budget crisis,
no
right.
Budget.
And they didn't go back and get those vendors once the crisis was over. So they're still limited with the number of vendors that they even have available.
Well, let's give Ms. McBride the final word here. I'm sure we can all imagine, well, we can't imagine the pain of your son having been murdered 13 months ago by the United Center. You've tracked down eyewitnesses, but there hasn't been an arrest. What is it you want?
I want justice for my son. I want justice for 766 other murders out there that has murdered these people. I want peace of mind, which I have not had for a year and almost a half. So I just want justice for my son and all the other children.
When we come back, a candidate for mayor who says one reason he wants to reduce the violence is the memory of his own son who took a wrong turn into the drug underworld and was shot dead.